Hello, my friends. In this video, I'd like to talk about magic mushrooms. Specifically, the question, are they aliens? Or wait, maybe elves or goblins or some other kind of entity? Anyway, my friends, slightly different video today because 'tis the season for the mushroom, and I would like to talk about a personal experience I've had with the Liberty Cap or Psilocybin Semilanceata mushroom, aka the magic mushroom. And I'd like to tell you about that, and after that, I'd like to link it into folklore, both past and present, and the spiritual worldview of our ancestors and many of us today as well. So, before I start rattling on about this, obviously this video is for information and educational purposes only. I'm not going to tell you how to find Liberty Caps. Mainly because I made a video about that last week and YouTube nailed me for it. So there will be no identification of mushrooms in this video. But if you want to know a little bit more, stay to the end of the video and I might provide some links. First though, magic mushrooms, Psilocybin Semilanceta. I'm not going to talk about any of the health or psychological benefits of this. I'm just going to talk about a very weird experience I had some years ago when mushrooms were still legal in the United Kingdom, where I had an encounter with what some people call the others or them. And I feel this ties into folklore, both past and present, as I said earlier. So this was when I was a teenager, and I'd already had a few experiences with shrooms at this point. When I was like a kid, you could buy these in Camden Market in London, and I was learning how to identify them in the fields around me right now, including just over there. And I'd already begun to have a lot of fun, but started to sense that there was a kind of spiritual dimension to these guys. While a lot of my friends were just having a lot of fun, I could sort of feel the trees moving in a certain way that seemed to me, and I'm sure many of you out there will relate to this if you have partaken of this particular fungi, I could feel that the trees were kind of alive, conscious. In fact, the whole world seemed to be conscious and listening to me. And sometimes the pattern of the clouds or a rustling of the leaves would sort of change or seem to based on what my thoughts were doing. So this idea that the universe is alive, we sometimes call, in terms of our ancestors, the principle of animism, or sometimes pantheism. The terms are slightly different, but the idea that behind every tree and river, and even behind, I don't know, something like an apple or a inanimate rock, there is a certain spirit or animating principle. This idea still exists today in a scientific context called panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is somehow fundamental. Anyway, I'd already had various experiences like this, but then one time, this was probably maybe my, I don't know, 10th time ever having magic mushrooms, and I just decided to go full on. For those of you interested, it was probably about 60 or more Liberty Caps. If you're watching in the US, I'm told that the Liberty Caps this side of the pond are slightly stronger, so that might not add up if you're watching over there. And again, this is not an endorsement of drug use, please. This is just for information purposes. But I had had a lot more than any of my friends, and we were having a great time. But then at some point, it was like these gates at the back of my skull opened, and there was this strange kind of music that sounded for all the world like the dwarfs in Snow White. They were like, it was this jingly, jangly elf music, and they were saying things. I suddenly heard voices, and they were saying, "We're coming in. We're coming. We're coming. We're coming. We're coming. We're coming." And they were saying, "You've done enough to let us in. You can see us now. We can now talk to you because you've done enough." And I could see them marching like little dwarfs in twos and threes and fours, kind of from some subconscious hyperspace realm back here behind my skull through my mind. And they were saying things like, this is brilliant. You've done enough that we can actually see the world through your eyes now. Not many people, not many humans do this. This is great. And they were saying things like, "Don't worry about us. We're benevolent." And I could get glimpses of them. They were like, they looked a lot like drawings, popular descriptions of grey aliens, but they had mushroom heads, and they also looked a bit gnome-like, like I've already said, little dwarf, little like, sort of goblin-like, but with sort of mushroom hats, like like little stereotypical Mexicans, and these little bodies, grey bodies, and slitty black eyes. And they were marching in, and they kept saying, "Don't worry, we're benevolent, we're benevolent." And they explained to me in no uncertain terms that they've been drifting through space for millennia, and they landed on this planet long ago, and it's their job to help shape humanity, and they grow as little mushrooms, even though that's not their real form, just so humans can eat them, so they can teach us lessons, but also so they can experience the world through human eyes, because that's quite a fun thing to do, to be incarnate as a kind of human. Maybe they do it with cows and other animals as well, I don't know. But that is very explicitly what they were explaining to me as they marched through my brain space. So that was a very serious experience of mine, and the first time that I've ever, in my experience, had a literal encounter with a, I guess you would say, non-material entity. And I fully took that at face value. Some of you, depending on your conditioning, might say, well, surely that's just a hallucination. Um, Reality could be a hallucination for all we know, and that experience was as real to me as any other. That's just my view. But it's interesting, and if you want to know more about when mushrooms start talking to you, go to Terence McKenna. There's loads of his videos and recordings on YouTube. He's the go-to guy here, but I just wanted to share a personal experience of mine and link this into folklore, because I'm a folklorist, and that's what interests me, and it relates, I think, to folklore past and present. So there's a lot of evidence to suggest when humanity first kind of started flourishing, started producing art and culture about 40,000 years ago in Europe, that psilocybin containing mushrooms were part of that process. Again, this is Terence McKenna had this theory, the stoned ape theory, it's called. It's gone from fringe theory to a lot closer to the mainstream. So a lot of people now think that psilocybin or some sort of hallucinogen had a huge part in the emergence of human culture, almost like the fruit from the tree of the Garden of Eden. You know, suddenly our minds were blown open. And weirdly, it happened at the same time in lots of different places across the world, in the Amazon, in Indonesia, and in Europe, in Africa. And up until that point, for most of humans' existence, we'd been very dull creatures, just chipping away with bits of stone. And then suddenly, boom, this flowering of culture and art. And we see mushroom deposits in those caves. We see the cave art with mushrooms growing out of them in different parts of the world. It's very clearly part of the story and has been part of the religious experience for a very long time. And I believe using these mushrooms is possibly where the animistic worldview of our ancestors came from, because when you take these mushrooms, you can see the universe is alive, it's conscious, literally sentient. Also, in more recent sort of folklore and folk art, elves and fairies are always associated with mushrooms, aren't they? Usually the fly agaric or Amanita muscara mushroom. It's certainly more recent sort of art and iconography. But also in the folk naming of the Liberty Cap. In Britain, in lots of regional parts of Britain, before it was called the Liberty Cap, it was called the Elf Cap or the Witch Hat. Again, tying these mushrooms and their experience into the folklore and mythology of elves. If you look at the shape of the hat, it looks like an elf's hat or a goblin's hat, that long thing. And also with witchcraft as well. We know, with what we do know about witchcraft, in a lot of their potions and brews, they would have used certain hallucinogens. I'm sure a lot of the time that would have been nightshade based plants. We don't know a lot about it, but I think it's highly likely that the psilocybin containing Liberty Cap was part of the witch's herbal medicine cabinet, if you know what I mean. So aliens, this is interesting. This, I think there's an immaterial entity that sort of lives behind mushrooms, and depending on what sort of cultural lens it's diffused through, they either appear as elves or goblins, like in the past, or in our modern age, grey aliens. And this is my theory about aliens. I don't for a moment believe that aliens fly through space in little spaceships to visit us on Earth. I think that idea is very dated. It's from the 20th century. It's so prosaic. I think aliens are not extraterrestrials, but interdimensional beings that we can sometimes see when we alter our conscious state through certain um, plant-based medicines and hallucinogens. Outside of the world of mushrooms, we see this in ayahuasca art. Ayahuasca, the Amazonian hallucinogenic brew of Amazonian vegetalistas and shamans. In a lot of this artwork and in a lot of these visions, and this is from my experience as well, you see flying saucers and UFOs along with the typically Amazonian symbolism, like, you know, snakes and jaguars and butterflies and that kind of thing, which is just weird, isn't it? But it just suggests to me that this alien archetypal imagery is from the same sort of realm of the collective unconscious as elves and fairies and the she. There's a whole world of invisible entities out there, the other side of the veil, that appear to us in different forms, depending on our own cultural conditioning and what substance we've eaten. Anyway, that's my weird mushroom rant for today. If you're a regular viewer of my videos, I appreciate that's a slight sidestep from normal. If you're new here and you've just come looking for how to identify magic mushrooms, you're in the wrong place, because I don't want to get walloped by YouTube. But if you do click on my Patreon link below, there might be some more information that might interest you. It's currently free. I've made the video free to view, so check that out if you want. Or just watch another video about mushrooms, such as, is Santa Claus a magic mushroom? Thanks, guys. See you later.